to open up this conference. Paulina, thank you for being with us, and thanks for the continued support of the European Commission in this initiative and in maintaining this important dialogue with Asia, where so often third country issues are currently focused on the UK or the US. And I think it's really important that we don't forget the implications this will also have for an incredibly fast-growing financial market and economic area, which is Asia in its widest sense. Paulina, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Nick, and good morning to Europe, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues joining from Asia. I hope you can all hear me well. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you. Like Nick, I regret that we cannot yet do this in person, but hopefully that will be the case before too long. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Takashi, who will be speaking just after me, I think, for the very efficient co-chairing of the regulatory forum, which took place on Friday. Given that we are in a virtual world, we kept it close to Nick's conference, but not entirely back to back. I will be brief this morning. I wanted to just give some framing remarks to the two subjects that you're going to discuss later in the panels, sustainable finance and digital. I would, under normal circumstances, would have liked to also speak a bit about the recovery. As you know, in Europe, most countries are now making away with the COVID restrictions. And I would have spoken about the role of the Capital Markets Union and the Banking Union in that regard. But of course, at this point, our thoughts are with Ukraine. And as you all know, the European Union condemns in the strongest possible terms the Russian unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. We have taken a number of very stringent packages with sanctions together, and I think that's important here, in very close and good cooperation with the G7 countries, but also with other allies across the world. And now I think it's very important that we focus on the implementation of these sanctions. And also there we are cooperating with our partners, and I'm mentioning it here in this conference because, of course, many of you are financial institutions that are working in international context. And I think that, of course, the more and the better aligned we can be, and the better the cooperation can be also on the implementation of sanctions, I think the easier and better for all of you. Of course, this has an impact on ourselves as well, on the EU, on our companies, on our financial markets. I'm not going to dwell on that. We are all very aware. If we look at the on the side of energy, for example, on commodity price in general, on food security, you have probably seen that the Commission is taking quite a lot of measures in this area, also seeing how we can very quickly reduce our dependence on fossil fuels in general, but right now, of course, Russian gas in particular. So a lot going on in that space, but of course, something that we need to continue to be very, very vigilant on. I think it's fair to say that the European financial sector entered this new crisis from a good position, but of course, something that we need to be very vigilant to and need to continue to monitoring. Moving on to the two main subjects of today, and the colleagues of mine will be on the panels later today, both on sustainable finance and on digital. Starting here with the green transition with sustainable finance, I think that is as important as ever in the current context. I think what's happening now really proves the point that we need to be much faster in moving into the the space of renewables. Now, in terms of what the EU has done, and I think we started this work probably a little bit earlier than some other jurisdictions did, already back in 2018, 2019. 3 building blocks of the EU sustainable finance strategy. And I'm here zooming in on sustainable finance because, of course, we have the Green Deal and everything else that goes with it. But I think what's mostly relevant for this conference is what the financial institutions, what financial sector can do in this context. 3 building blocks, as I mentioned. The first is disclosures. I think this is really at the core of the sustainable finance debate. We have rules in place already in Europe since quite a while. And as some of you know, we are currently working on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is hopefully going to be agreed relatively soon by the EU legislators. And I think this is really a piece and parcel of the approach here. in the EU, we believe in double materiality, which means that we have to look at not only how the ESG factors impact companies, financial companies and others, but also the other way around. What is the impact that the financial companies have on the climate in general and the various ESG factors? And I think that is really, really crucial here. So that's the first building block. The second building block is taxonomy. You've all heard about it. Many jurisdictions in Asia are also working on their taxonomies. The taxonomy for us is a voluntary tool which should help investors to see, to channel investments against sustainable projects. I'm not going to speak a lot about that at all, because that is the subject of the panel that will come after the keynote speeches. So my colleague Rafaela will discuss that with you in more detail. But we do think that there's one important piece of the overall sustainable finance puzzle. And then I'm coming to the third building block, and that is the green labels, green products. Green bonds, of course, are very topical. On this also, we have a legal proposal on the table in Europe, whereby the co-legislators, the European Parliament and the member states are in the process of agreeing on these rules. Of course, in the meanwhile, the EU is already issuing green bonds, as are many EU countries themselves individually, and of course also many of our Asian partners, China and others, are very active in this space. So these, I think, are the three general building blocks, if you wish. Now, there is more to it, of course, as so often, nothing is simple in life. And there are four additional elements that I want to mention here. One is transition finance. That's the focus of the G20 Indonesian presidency. Very important subject, I think, for all of us. As I said, this transition probably has to happen even more faster and quicker than we would have thought a couple of weeks ago. We are very active in this space. I think there is a lot to be done at the group level, but also at the entity level. And we are trying to also help companies in identifying themselves the process, the transition plans that they need at an individual level to make this transition happen. So that's the first point. The second point is the resilience of financial institutions. So the processes that the financial institutions themselves have to have in place to manage climate risk, to deal with the transition. And there we have put forward in Europe rules in the context of banking, in the context of insurance, and these are proposals which are pending with our legislators. Third point here is inclusion, really important. If we look at what's happening now on the energy prices side, I think that says it all. We need to make sure that citizens can be part of this transition, and that SMEs in particular get the support they need for the transition. And then the last point, and I think that is a suitable closing point on this chapter in this conference, and that is the international cooperation, because I think that is so crucial here. A lot of regions are working in this space. I think it would be not be realistic to think that everyone will do the same. But I do think it's really, really important that we have this very close cooperation, be it in G20, be it in G7, be it in the Financial Stability Board, be it in the IOSCO. We have on the EU side our own international platform for sustainable finance. We are very happy and proud that we can count many Asian partners as members of the platform. And these, I think, is just so important that we continue this cooperation and discussions in this fora. Again, not everyone will do the same, but I think it really is our responsibility to try to ensure that we have a baseline. Some jurisdictions may want to go a bit faster. They want to be a bit more granular. I think that's the case of the EU. But having this international baseline and as much coherence and interoperability as we can between the different systems, I think that is very important. It's something I hear all the time, that we need to become even better at trying to have this international interoperability. And there is, of course, a certain degree of complexity involved here, but I think that's a little bit unavoidable. We are living in a complicated world. Transition is complex, so I think it would be impossible to have rules that do not have a certain degree of technical complexity. But again, I think the key here is that we work very well together. I will then move to the final point today, and that is the digital agenda. Also, of course, very, very important. We often speak in Europe about the twin transition. On the one hand, green, on the other hand, digital. ideally green and digital. And here it's interesting to see how the world has changed just in the space of a couple of years. Of course, the COVID situation, the pandemic, clearly accelerated this shift, which was happening anyway. And I think what's interesting to see in the digital space is that you have the whole kind of societal shift, if you wish, in terms of how companies are working. We used to speak about fintech versus banks. Now we have big tech, of course, coming in as the big player here. You may have seen, by the way, that in the EU, the Digital Markets Act was agreed by the legislators last week, and I think that's an important piece of this overall digital ecosystem, regulatory ecosystem that we need to put in place. So that is in a way at the kind of systemic level. And then we have, if we look at the, let's say, individual level, we see how retail investors, consumers have completely changed their behavior during the pandemic. Not everyone, of course, and we can speak about financial inclusion because that's very important. We have to speak about financial inclusion for those that are less digitally savvy than many others. But I think generally speaking, I personally grew up in a world where you want to invest, you went to your bank, you got advice, and the bank invested for you. That's obviously not the way my kids will go about this issue in a few years' time. And I think that's very interesting because we need to see how the whole regulatory ecosystem adapts to this new situation. And that's something that we are doing on the EU side in the context of our retail work. And there we have some important initiatives coming up later. So that's the individual level. Then coming back to the kind of more systemic and structural level, two initiatives here that I wanted to mention briefly, and I think many of you are aware of them already. One has to do with digital operational resilience. That's what we call DORA in the EU, because we always like acronyms, and this is a very nice one because it's easy to remember. And this is really about the operational resilience of the system. What we are trying here in this proposal, which is, by the way, also hopefully soon to be agreed with the co-legislators, is to focus in particular on the information and communications technology risk management, so ICT management of our financial entities, in terms of having rules around testing of ITC systems, in terms of having rules around supervision, financial supervisors' awareness of cyber risks that impact finance, and looking at ICT-related incidents. We also are putting in place a rather coherent and stringent oversight framework. And we really want to make sure that our financial institutions understand and appreciate and deal with ICT third-party risk. We think this is a relatively interesting and also to some extent groundbreaking proposal also internationally. Of course, there is a lot of discussions on these issues in international fora, and the EU is being very actively part of these discussions. But I do think that we probably also here have the advantage of having been able to start working also on regulation in this area earlier than others. And of course, very happy to continue the discussion on DORA and other actions that can be taken to increase operational digital resilience. And then finally, and I'm going to close on that, the issue of crypto assets, was also very, very topical. We have had a lot of discussions around stable coins. Also here, there is a very useful and interesting debate going on at the international level. I think also here on the EU side, we thought it would be useful to already start our legislative process. We have done so with the so-called MiCA proposals, so the market in crypto assets. And the idea here is really to have a very wide-ranging, a very all-encompassing, if you wish, legislation that covers this still relatively new area of all kind of crypto assets. Of course, this gives interesting opportunities to investors. At the same time, there is a lot of risks, and that's why we think this has to be well regulated, well supervised, and again, of course, also here there is an international debate which we are very actively participating on. Now, and that's my very final remark, looking to the future, we also, as others, following with a lot of interest what happened in the context of decentralized finance. And that's something which I think we need to all continue to monitor very closely. I think our feeling so far is that also in the context of decentralized finance, there is often a, let's say, real world entity involved at some point of the food chain. And that entity is, of course, subject to MiCA in the future or to our other financial service legislation, but clearly still an area which we need to watch. I think I have exhausted 14 of my 15 minutes, so I will stop here just to conclude by saying again how delighted we are from the EU side, from the Commission side, to participate in this very useful and interesting conference. And I want to repeat what I already said. I think what this conference shows is the importance of international dialogue, the importance of having these very rich and detailed exchanges on the various regulatory initiatives ongoing in various regions. And I thank you all for your attention, and I wish you a very successful day and afternoon. Thank you.
Paulina, thank you very much for this very spirited and positive introduction and kind of the breadth of issues you covered as usual. I think 2 or 3 small, maybe very quick reactions. I think on sustainability, I think very much appreciate your last point about international cooperation, and I think we are pushing so hard towards reaching the same objective wherever we are in the world, hopefully most of us at least, to deal with the climate change issues. But I think the path, the transition path, or the tools chosen might be different. And so I think there's a big concern in the industry that this could lead to more fragmentation rather than a practical approach of mutual recognition or collaboration. So it's really good that you raised that point. And I think on digital, actually it's nice you mentioned DORA, because we spent our panel discussion last year on operational resilience and everything that is related to operational resilience. This time we will focus a bit more on cryptos, but I think the key theme is how do we benefit of the use of technology in overcoming fragmentation, while at the same time applying regulation in a way that doesn't reintroduce unnecessary fragmentation. And I should say unnecessary because I understand there's certain pragmatism around consumer protection, other things that need to be, financial stability that need to be taken into consideration. So thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for opening this up, and looking forward to continuing this dialogue.